The massive training facility buzzed with nervous energy as 200 of the galaxy's finest young warriors gathered for the most prestigious military academy selection process. Species from across 17 star systems had sent their best candidates to compete for just 50 spots in the Galactic Defense Corps elite program. Commander Thexvar stood at attention, his four arms crossed behind his back as he surveyed the assembled hopefuls. The reptilian officer's yellow eyes swept across the crowd with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen thousands of recruits come and go over his 40-year career. Most would wash out within the first week. The few who remained would become legends. "Welcome to Hell Week," Thexvar announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast hangar. "For the next 7 days, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will face challenges designed to break your spirit, test your resolve, and separate the true warriors from the pretenders." Among the crowd, Kethra shifted anxiously. The young Saurian hunter stood barely 5 feet tall, her green scales still bearing the bright patterns of youth rather than the darker hues that would come with age. At only 16 standard years, she was the youngest candidate in the group by at least 2 years. Her selection had caused quite a stir back on Sorrow's Prime, where many questioned whether someone so young could handle the intense pressure. "The first phase of your training will be team-based exercises," Thexvar continued. "Each of you will select one partner from this group. Choose wisely. Your partner's failures will become your failures. Their weaknesses will drag you down. Their strengths might save your life." Kethra's heart sank. She had hoped for individual challenges where her natural hunting skills could shine. Team exercises meant politics, social dynamics, and all the things that had made her an outsider back home. She watched as the other candidates began forming natural alliances. The 3 Corinthian giants immediately gravitated toward each other, their crystalline bodies glowing with shared frequency patterns. A group of sleek Veltari pilots clustered together, already discussing flight formations in their melodic language. Then there was the human. Marcus Chen stood alone near the back of the group, seemingly unbothered by his isolation. The human was unremarkable in almost every way that mattered in military circles. He wasn't particularly tall, muscular, or imposing. His brown hair was cut in a simple style, and his dark eyes held a calm intelligence that seemed oddly out of place among the nervous energy of the other candidates. What made him truly stand out was his species' reputation. Humans were new to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 30 years ago. Most species viewed them as curiosities at best, primitives at worst. Their home world was classified as a Class 7 death world, but that designation was often dismissed as a bureaucratic error. After all, how dangerous could a planet be if it had produced such an unremarkable species? Kethra had studied the files of every candidate, as any good hunter would. Marcus Chen's record was interesting in a quiet way. He had scored in the top 10% on every written examination, showed exceptional problem-solving abilities, and had somehow managed to convince the review board to accept his application despite humanity's limited military experience. But none of that mattered now, surrounded by beings who could literally crush him with their bare hands. 30 minutes to choose partners, Thexvar called out. "Remember, this decision will affect every exercise for the next week." The scramble began immediately. Kethra watched as the strongest and most impressive candidates were quickly claimed. The Corinthians formed their alliance. The Veltari pilots paired off with other flight-capable species. A group of heavily armored Thrakans selected partners based on size and apparent toughness. With each passing minute, Kethra felt her options diminishing. Being young and small meant she was far from anyone's first choice. She began approaching other candidates, but the responses were predictable. "Sorry, little one," said a massive Bracken warrior, his tusks gleaming as he spoke. "I need someone who can keep up in combat situations." A Zenthran martial artist was more direct. "You're too small, you'd be a liability." Even some of the mid-tier candidates rejected her politely, but firmly. Kethra felt the familiar sting of being judged by her appearance rather than her abilities. On Sorrow's Prime, she had been the youngest hunter ever to successfully track and capture a Void Crawler, one of their world's most dangerous predators. But here, surrounded by giants and warriors from advanced civilizations, those accomplishments seemed meaningless. As the minutes ticked by, her choices became increasingly limited. Soon only the least impressive candidates remained unpaired, along with herself and the human. Kethra glanced over at Marcus, who seemed completely relaxed despite his obvious predicament. He wasn't frantically trying to convince anyone to partner with him. Instead, he appeared to be studying the other teams, taking notes on a small electronic tablet. With 5 minutes remaining, Kethra made her decision. She approached the human, who looked up from his notes with a slight smile. "I'm Kethra of the Saurian hunting clans," she said formally. "Would you be willing to partner with me for these exercises?" Marcus studied her for a moment, his dark eyes taking in her small stature and nervous posture. Then he stood and extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Force. I'd be honored to work with you, Kethra." She grasped his hand awkwardly, surprised by the firmness of his grip and the calluses on his palm. For someone who looked so soft, he had clearly done manual labor. "Excellent choice," Marcus said quietly, glancing around at the other teams. "I've been watching the group dynamics. Most of these teams chose based on obvious physical advantages or species loyalty. They're going to have problems when the exercises require different skill sets." "What makes you think that?" Kethra asked, intrigued despite her disappointment at being left with the weakest possible partner. "The commander mentioned that this is designed to break people. Physical challenges alone won't do that to candidates this elite. They'll throw psychological elements, puzzle solving, leadership rotations, and scenarios that require unconventional thinking. A team of four-armed giants might dominate a strength contest, but what happens when they need someone small enough to fit through a maintenance tunnel, or when the challenge requires understanding predator behavior? Kethra's estimation of her partner rose slightly. At least he could think strategically, even if he couldn't help in any physical confrontations. "Time's up," Thexvar bellowed. "Teams are now locked. You will succeed or fail together. No changes will be permitted under any circumstances." As the commander began outlining the first challenge, Kethra caught several amused looks from other candidates. The smallest and the weakest had found each other, apparently. Some of the larger beings were barely containing their laughter. "First exercise begins at dawn," Thexvar announced. "Combat simulation in the deep forest environment. Each team will start from opposite ends of a 50-square-kilometer wilderness preserve. Your objective is to capture the enemy flag while defending your own. Rules are simple. No weapons except what you can craft or find. No permanent injury to other candidates. First team to successfully capture and return an enemy flag wins. Last 3 teams are immediately disqualified." The crowd murmured with excitement. This was a classic military exercise that favored the strong, fast, and experienced. Kethra felt her confidence plummet even further. But Marcus was taking more notes, seemingly unconcerned by the daunting nature of the challenge. 50 kilometers of forest, he mused quietly. Probably Earth-standard gravity and atmosphere since they want to make it fair for all species. That's interesting. "How is any of this interesting?" Kethra whispered back. "We're going to be eliminated on the first day." Marcus looked at her with those calm, dark eyes. "Tell me about your hunting experience. What's the largest predator you've tracked?" "A void crawler. They're about 12 feet long, completely silent, and can phase partially out of normal space to avoid detection. But that was on my home world, where I knew the terrain and had proper equipment." "Impressive, and I assume you succeeded." "Yes, but—" "No, but you tracked and captured a 12-foot invisible predator. That's the kind of skill that wins challenges like this." Marcus gestured toward the other teams. "Look at them. They're all thinking about this as a combat exercise, brute force, direct confrontation, overwhelming strength. But the commander said we have to capture a flag and return it. That's not a combat mission. That's a stealth and reconnaissance mission." Kethra felt a spark of hope. "You think we can use my hunting skills?" "I think your hunting skills are going to win this for us. But first, I need to understand the environment better. Can you tell me about Earth-standard forests? What kind of predator and prey animals might be in there?" They spent the rest of the briefing period quietly discussing strategy, while the other teams engaged in loud displays of confidence and strength. By the time they were dismissed to their quarters for the night, Kethra was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, they might have a chance. But as she lay on her narrow bunk that night, listening to the conversations from nearby rooms, her doubts crept back in. The other candidates were discussing combat formations, strength-based tactics, and aggressive assault plans. They sounded like proper warriors preparing for battle. Meanwhile, her partner was a human whose species was barely a footnote in galactic military history, and her greatest asset was the ability to track animals that most people had never heard of. Tomorrow would determine whether Marcus's confidence was justified, or whether they were about to become the first team eliminated from the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. Kethra closed her eyes and tried to focus on the techniques her grandmother had taught her about reading the signs of the forest. In the morning, they would find out if a young hunter and an untested human could prove that there was more than one way to win a war. Dawn broke over the training facility with the pale light of an artificial sun, carefully calibrated to match Earth-standard illumination. Kethra woke to find Marcus already up, quietly performing what appeared to be some kind of stretching routine. The movements were fluid and controlled, more like a dance than exercise. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to wake candidates in nearby rooms. "Ready for our nature hike?" Despite her nervousness, Kethra found herself smiling at his casual attitude. "You seem very calm for someone about to face elimination." Panic clouds judgment. "Besides, I spent some time last night researching the other teams. We have advantages they don't even know about." They made their way to the transport area, where other teams were gathering in small clusters. The atmosphere was tense, with nervous energy barely contained beneath the surface. Kethra noticed several teams eyeing them with what could only be described as pity. Commander Thexvar appeared precisely at sunrise, flanked by a group of instructors from various species. His yellow eyes swept over the assembled candidates with no hint of warmth. "The Deep Forest Preserve has been configured for this exercise," he announced. "Earth-standard gravity, atmosphere, and climate. Temperature will range from 5 degrees Celsius at night to 30 during the day. The forest contains both predator and prey species from multiple worlds, so remain alert at all times." He gestured to a massive display screen that flickered to life behind him. "Each team will be assigned a starting position on the perimeter. Your base flag is located exactly 1 kilometer from your starting point, in the direction indicated by your compass. Enemy flags are distributed randomly throughout the preserve. You have 72 hours to complete the objective. Failure to return to an extraction zone within that time results in automatic disqualification." The screen showed a detailed topographical map of the forest. Kethra studied it carefully, noting the rivers, elevation changes, and dense canopy areas. Her hunter instincts began automatically cataloging potential hiding spots, water sources, and natural navigation landmarks. "One final note," Thexvar continued. "This exercise is being monitored by instructors stationed throughout the preserve. They will observe but not interfere unless there is immediate danger of permanent injury. Your performance will be evaluated not just on success or failure, but on teamwork, tactical thinking, and adaptation to unexpected challenges." The teams were loaded onto separate transports and taken to their starting positions. Kethra found herself in a small aircraft with Marcus, heading toward what the map had indicated was a particularly dense section of forest on the eastern border of the preserve. "Nervous?" Marcus asked as they approached their drop point. "Yes," she admitted, "but also excited. It's been too long since I've been in a real forest." "That's what I was hoping to hear." They were deposited in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees that reminded Kethra somewhat of the ancient forests on Sorrow's Prime. The air was crisp and filled with unfamiliar scents, but the underlying pattern was familiar: earth, growing things, and the musk of animals, both predator and prey. Marcus pulled out his tablet and checked their compass bearing. "Flag should be 1 kilometer due south. Want to lead the way?" Kethra felt a flutter of surprise. Most species considered navigation and pathfinding to be leadership roles, automatically assumed by the largest or most dominant team member. But Marcus was deferring to her expertise without question. She closed her eyes and extended her senses, a technique taught by her grandmother for reading the forest. The sounds painted a picture in her mind: small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of something large and predatory. But beneath it all, she could sense the paths that animals used to move through this space. "This way," she said, setting off through the trees. Marcus followed without question, moving more quietly than she had expected. For someone from a species that seemed so clumsy and loud, he was surprisingly good at not disturbing the forest around them. They found their base flag exactly where indicated, attached to a metal pole driven into the ground in another small clearing. The flag itself was a bright blue rectangle with their team number clearly displayed. "So far, so good," Marcus said, examining the surrounding area. Now we need to find an enemy flag without letting anyone find ours. Kethra was already studying the ground around their base. 7 other teams, 8 flags total including ours. The preserve is 50 square kilometers, so if they're distributed randomly, we're looking at roughly 6 square kilometers per flag. Good math, but they won't be truly random. The instructors will have placed them in locations that create interesting tactical challenges. Marcus pulled out his tablet and began making notes. Tell me what you can read from this area. Kethra knelt down and began examining the forest floor carefully. Years of hunting had taught her to read the signs that most people missed entirely. After a few minutes of careful observation, she began to see the story the forest was telling. Several teams have already passed through this general area, she said. Large footprints heading northwest, probably the Corinthians based on the depth and spacing. Lighter tracks going due west, possibly the Veltari group. And something else. She paused, studying a barely visible disturbance in the fallen leaves. Something moving very carefully, trying to mask its trail, recent maybe an hour ago. Can you follow any of these trails? The careful one, yes. The others are too obvious, probably deliberate false trails or teams that don't care about stealth. She stood and brushed dirt from her hands. But Marcus, I need to ask you something. What exactly are you bringing to this partnership? I understand tracking and forest craft, but what's your specialty? Marcus smiled, and for a moment, something shifted in his expression. The calm, unremarkable facade fell away slightly, revealing something much sharper underneath. Pattern recognition, systems analysis, and what my instructors back home called aggressive problem solving. Also, I grew up in some of Earth's more challenging environments. Let's just say that my planet's reputation as a Class 7 death world isn't entirely bureaucratic error. Before Kethra could ask what he meant, a distant sound caught her attention. Shouting, followed by what sounded like heavy impacts against trees. Combat, Marcus said immediately. 2 teams, probably the Corinthians and someone else based on the noise level. Should we investigate? No, we should learn from it, come on. Marcus led them toward the sound, but instead of approaching directly, he circled around to put them downwind and out of sight. The noise grew louder as they got closer, and soon they could make out individual voices shouting commands in various alien languages. They crested a small hill and looked down into a ravine where the source of the commotion was immediately apparent. The 3 Corinthians were engaged in what could only be described as a brawl with a team consisting of 2 massive Thraken warriors. Both teams were attempting to reach the same objective, a bright red flag planted on a rocky outcrop in the center of the ravine. The fight was brutal and direct. The Corinthians were using their crystalline bodies to generate defensive barriers while advancing slowly toward the flag. The Thrakens were responding with raw strength, throwing rocks the size of small boulders and charging directly at their opponents. Idiots, Marcus muttered under his breath. What do you mean? Look at the positioning. Both teams saw the flag and immediately assumed they had to fight each other for it, but watch the instructors. Kethra looked more carefully and spotted 2 figures in camouflaged gear positioned on opposite sides of the ravine. They were taking notes, but making no move to intervene, even as the combat below them grew increasingly intense. They're being evaluated on their tactical decisions, Marcus continued. And both teams are failing spectacularly. They're expending energy on a fight that isn't necessary, making enough noise to alert every other team in a 5-kilometer radius, and positioning themselves in a tactical nightmare where they have no escape routes. So what should they be doing? Exactly what we're doing. Observe, gather intelligence, and wait for a better opportunity. Marcus was taking notes on his tablet again. 2 teams eliminated by their own poor judgment. That puts us in the top 6 automatically. As if to prove his point, the sound of approaching footsteps came from the far side of the ravine. Another team had been drawn by the noise, and now both the Corinthians and Thrakens found themselves caught in the open with a third hostile group approaching from higher ground. Time to go, Marcus said quietly. We've learned what we needed to. They withdrew carefully, leaving the 3 teams to sort out their tactical disaster. As they moved through the forest, Kethra found herself viewing her partner with new respect. His analysis of the situation had been accurate and insightful. How did you know they would make those mistakes? She asked. because most military training focuses on direct confrontation and overwhelming force. It's effective in conventional warfare, but this isn't conventional warfare. This is a puzzle disguised as a combat exercise. They spent the rest of the morning moving methodically through the forest, following animal trails and avoiding the obvious paths that other teams might use. Kethra's tracking skills were invaluable, allowing them to detect the passage of other candidates long before they could be spotted themselves. By midday, they had identified the locations of 2 more flags and the approximate positions of 3 other teams. More importantly, they had done so without being detected themselves, despite passing within a few hundred meters of one enemy team. "I think I'm beginning to understand your strategy," Kethra said as they paused beside a small stream to rest and plan their next move. "Which is?" "You're treating this like a hunting expedition. Patient observation, careful stalking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." She paused, studying his face. "That's very human, isn't it?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Earth is a world where almost everything is trying to kill you. Humans learn to survive not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the smartest and most adaptable. We became the apex predators on our planet not through physical dominance, but through superior tactics and the ability to outthink our enemies. And now you're hunting flags instead of animals. And you're the best tracker I've ever seen, which brings me to our next decision." Marcus gestured toward the forest ahead of them. "We've located 2 flags, but both are currently guarded by teams that are expecting direct assault. Do we wait for nightfall and try a stealth approach, or do we look for a third option?" Kethra closed her eyes and listened to the forest again. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of ongoing conflict from the ravine, but there was something else. A pattern in the animal calls that suggested another disturbance somewhere to the northeast. "There's something happening about 3 kilometers that way," she said, pointing. "Want to investigate?" "Lead the way." As they moved through the forest, both of them began to realize that this was more than just a military exercise. It was becoming a test of everything they thought they knew about strategy, teamwork, and the assumptions they made about their own capabilities. And somewhere in the back of Marcus's mind, a small voice was whispering that they might actually win this thing. The disturbance Kethra had detected turned out to be more significant than either of them had expected. As they approached the source of the unusual animal calls, the sounds of the forest told a story of predator and prey, pursuit and desperation. "Something big is hunting," Kethra whispered, her hand instinctively moving to where a weapon would normally hang on her belt. "Not one of the introduced species. This is something else." Marcus checked his tablet, frowning at the readings. According to the briefing materials, the forest was supposed to contain only harmless fauna, but the biosensors are picking up something massive moving through the trees about half a kilometer ahead. They proceeded more cautiously, using every bit of cover the forest provided. The normal sounds of small creatures had fallen silent, replaced by an ominous quiet that made Kethra's scales stand on end. Whatever was moving through the forest ahead of them was large enough to terrify every other living thing in the area. Then they heard the screaming. The sound was unmistakably from one of the other teams, voices raised in terror and desperation. Marcus and Kethra exchanged a quick glance before moving toward the sound, abandoning stealth for speed. They reached a ridge overlooking a small valley and immediately saw the source of the commotion. Below them, a team consisting of 2 Veltari pilots was trapped on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by what could only be described as a nightmare made flesh. The creature was roughly the size of a small shuttle, covered in metallic scales that reflected the forest light in shifting patterns. It moved on 6 legs that ended in razor-sharp claws, each one capable of tearing through tree trunks like paper. Most terrifying were its 3 heads, each one tracking a different target with predatory intelligence. "Hydra-class bioweapon," Marcus said quietly, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Those aren't supposed to exist anymore." "You recognize it." "Earth encountered something similar during our first contact with the Zarathi Empire. Nearly wiped out our first diplomatic mission." Marcus was already pulling gear from his pack, moving with sudden urgency. "This isn't part of the exercise, Kethra. This is either a massive security failure or someone is actively trying to kill candidates." One of the Veltari below let out another scream as the creature's middle head snapped at the rocky outcrop, missing the pilot by mere centimeters. The elegant flying beings were built for grace and speed, not ground combat against apex predators. "We have to help them," Kethra said immediately. "Agreed, but we need to be smart about it." Marcus was assembling what looked like a primitive spear from materials in his pack. "Can you get around to the far side of the valley without being detected?" "Yes, but what are you planning?" "Distraction. That thing is hunting by movement and heat signatures. If we can split its attention and give the Veltari a chance to get airborne, they might be able to escape." Kethra nodded and began working her way around the valley's rim, using every technique her grandmother had taught her about moving unseen. Behind her, she could hear Marcus beginning to work his way down into the valley itself, making just enough noise to attract the creature's attention without triggering an immediate attack. From her new position, Kethra could see the entire tactical situation clearly. The two Veltari were trapped on an outcrop about 4 meters high, just out of reach of the creature's snapping jaws, but unable to gain enough altitude in the confined space to achieve proper flight. The Hydra was circling the base of the rocks, clearly intelligent enough to know that its prey couldn't escape. Marcus appeared at the edge of the clearing, moving with a careful, measured pace that reminded Kethra of her own hunting techniques. In his hands, the improvised spear looked primitive compared to the technological marvels most species used for weapons, but something about his posture suggested he knew exactly how to use it. The creature's rightmost head turned toward the new threat, studying Marcus with obvious predatory interest. For a moment, the valley was perfectly still, predator evaluating prey. Then Marcus did something completely unexpected. Instead of attacking or retreating, he began to make noise. Not the random shouting that might be expected from a panicked candidate, but a rhythmic, almost musical sound that seemed to resonate through the forest. The effect on the creature was immediate and dramatic. All three heads turned toward Marcus, and the massive body began to move away from the rocky outcrop where the Veltari were trapped. But instead of the aggressive charge Kethra expected, the creature's movement was cautious, almost uncertain. "Now," Marcus called out to the trapped pilots, "get airborne while it's focused on me." The Veltari didn't need to be told twice. They spread their gossamer wings and launched themselves from the outcrop, climbing rapidly toward the forest canopy. The creature's heads tracked their movement, but it seemed reluctant to completely abandon its focus on Marcus. That was when Kethra realized what her partner was doing. The sounds he was making weren't random noise. They were a hunting call, specifically designed to confuse predators about the nature of their prey. She had seen similar techniques used on Sorrow's Prime when hunters needed to distract dangerous animals. But holding the attention of a Hydra-class bioweapon was far more dangerous than distracting any creature she had ever faced. One of the creature's heads suddenly snapped toward Marcus with lightning speed. He rolled to the side, using his spear to deflect claws that would have torn him in half. The movement was so fluid and practiced that Kethra realized this wasn't the first time he had faced something like this. The second head struck while Marcus was recovering from his roll. He couldn't dodge in time, but instead of retreating, he did something that defied every survival instinct Kethra possessed. He stepped forward, inside the creature's reach, and drove his spear directly into the soft tissue at the base of the attacking head's neck. The Hydra let out a sound like metal tearing, and all three heads focused on Marcus with deadly intent. He was now well within the creature's killing range, armed only with a primitive weapon against something designed to destroy starships. That was when Kethra acted. She had been moving into position while Marcus held the creature's attention, using hunting techniques that had taken her years to master. Now she was directly above the creature, balanced on a thick tree branch that put her level with the Hydra's three heads. Kethra dropped from the tree onto the creature's back, her claws finding purchase in the gaps between its metallic scales. The middle head twisted toward this new threat, but she was already moving, using her small size and natural agility to stay ahead of its snapping jaws. What she was looking for was the neural cluster that all Hydra-class creatures possessed, a vulnerable point where the three brains connected to the central nervous system. Find that spot, and even the largest predator could be disabled with the right technique. The creature bucked and twisted, trying to dislodge her, while Marcus continued his attack from below. His spear work was impressive, keeping two of the heads busy while Kethra searched for her target. but she could see that he was tiring and his improvised weapon wouldn't last much longer against the creature's armored hide. Then she found it, a small depression at the base of the creature's central skull, barely large enough for her hand. Without hesitation, she drove her claws into the neural cluster and triggered the pressure technique her grandmother had taught her for disabling void crawlers. The effect was immediate. All three heads went limp, and the massive body collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. The creature wasn't dead, but it would remain unconscious for at least an hour. Kethra slid down from the creature's back, her legs shaking with adrenaline. Marcus was leaning on his spear, breathing heavily but grinning with what looked like genuine excitement. "Outstanding work," he said. "I've never seen anyone take down a Hydra class that quickly." "How did you know it would respond to hunting calls?" she asked. "Because everything responds to the right frequency if you understand its neural patterns. Humans have been studying predator behavior for thousands of years." Marcus gestured toward the unconscious creature. "This thing was designed to be the ultimate hunter, but that also makes it predictable if you understand the principles it was built on." The two Veltari landed nearby, their wings folded, and their expressions showing a mixture of gratitude and awe. "We owe you our lives," the larger of the two said in accented standard. "That creature would have killed us both." "What I want to know," Marcus said, pulling out his tablet, "is how a Hydra-class bioweapon ended up in what was supposed to be a safe training exercise." Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching aircraft filled the air. 3 Instructor shuttles were converging on their position, moving with the urgency of an emergency response. Commander Thexvar's voice crackled over their communication devices. "All teams return to base immediately. Exercise terminated due to security breach. Emergency extraction in progress." As they waited for pickup, Kethra found herself looking at Marcus with entirely new eyes. The quiet, unremarkable human had just helped her take down one of the most dangerous predators in known space, using nothing but primitive weapons and superior tactics. "You're not really a trainee, are you?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled, but there was something sharp and dangerous in his expression now. "Let's just say that Earth's application to the Galactic Defense Corps included some information that wasn't widely distributed. Humans have been preparing for this kind of training for a very long time." The shuttles arrived before she could ask what he meant, but as they were lifted away from the forest, Kethra couldn't shake the feeling that she had just seen something that would change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. And somehow, she suspected that this was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for all along. The emergency debriefing session took place in a sterile conference room that felt nothing like the natural environment they had just escaped. Commander Thexvar stood at the front of the room, his forearms crossed, and his expression grimmer than Kethra had ever seen it. Behind him, a large screen displayed security footage of their encounter with the Hydra-class creature. "The investigation is ongoing," Thexvar began, his voice carrying the weight of serious consequences. "What we know is this: someone deliberately introduced a Class A predator into what was supposed to be a controlled environment. This was not an accident, and it was not part of the planned exercise." The surviving candidates sat in small groups around the room. Of the original 16 teams, only 12 remained. 2 teams had been eliminated by the creature before Marcus and Kethra's intervention, and 2 more had been disqualified for abandoning their partners during the emergency evacuation. "The exercise will resume in 48 hours, Thexvar continued. "New parameters, new environment, enhanced security. But before we proceed, I want to address what happened in Sector 7. The screen changed to show aerial footage of Marcus and Kethra's fight with the creature. Kethra watched herself drop from the tree onto the beast's back, feeling a strange disconnect between the small figure on the screen and her memory of the event. "Candidate Chen, Candidate Kethra," Thexvar said formally. "Your actions saved the lives of 2 fellow candidates at considerable risk to yourselves. This demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment and courage we seek in Galactic Defense Corps officers." There was a murmur of approval from some of the other candidates, but Kethra noticed that several groups were looking at them with what appeared to be suspicion rather than admiration. "However," Thexvar continued, "your performance also raises questions that need to be addressed. Candidate Chen, your file indicates no previous experience with Hydra-class threats, yet your tactics were precise and professional. Explain." Marcus stood, his posture respectful but somehow subtly different from the nervous young recruit he had appeared to be just days ago. "Sir, Earth's military academies include extensive xenobiology training. We study potential threats from across the galaxy, including extinct bioweapon programs. And you just happen to remember the specific neural disruption frequency for a creature that was supposedly eliminated 50 years ago." "Yes, sir. Earth takes threats to human colonies very seriously. We prepare for contingencies that other species might consider unlikely." Thexvar studied Marcus for a long moment, his reptilian features unreadable. "Candidate Kethra, your neural cluster technique was expertly executed. That's an advanced hunting skill, not something typically taught to candidates your age." Kethra felt all eyes in the room turned toward her. "My grandmother was master hunter for the northern clans. She taught me techniques that aren't part of standard training." "I see," Thexvar made notes on his tablet. "Both of you demonstrated capabilities that exceed your official records. This is interesting." After the formal debriefing, the candidates were dismissed to their quarters. As they walked through the corridors, Kethra noticed that other candidates were giving them a wide berth. Conversations stopped when they approached, and she caught several suspicious glances. "They're afraid of us now," she said quietly to Marcus. "Good," he replied. "Fear means respect, and respect is something humans have been trying to earn in this galaxy for 30 years. Is that what this is about? Proving that humans belong here?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Kethra, can I trust you with something important?" The seriousness in his voice made her scales ripple with unease. "Yes." That creature wasn't introduced by some random saboteur. It was a test, specifically designed to evaluate how candidates react to unexpected lethal threats. The instructors were never in any real danger of losing candidates because they had countermeasures ready. But they wanted to see who would run, who would freeze, and who would fight. Kethra stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because the Hydra had a neural dampener implanted in its brain stem. I spotted it when we were fighting. The creature was operating at about 30% of its normal aggression level. Still dangerous enough to seem real, but not so dangerous that competent fighters couldn't handle it. So the whole thing was staged. The danger was real. The deaths would have been real if we had failed. But yes, it was a planned evaluation." Marcus resumed walking. "The question is, what were they really testing, and why did they want to see how a human and a saurian would work together under extreme pressure?" They reached Kethra's quarters, but she made no move to enter. "You think we're being manipulated?" "I think we're being evaluated for something much more important than admission to a standard military academy." Marcus glanced around the corridor to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Earth's application to the Galactic Defense Corps wasn't just about getting humans into the military. We're here to prove that humanity can contribute something unique to galactic security." "And what's that?" "The ability to think like predators instead of prey." Before Kethra could ask what he meant, her door chimed with an incoming message. She activated the display to find a formal summons. "Report to Conference Room Alpha at 800 tomorrow for special evaluation," she read aloud. "What do you think this means?" Marcus pulled out his tablet and checked his own messages. His expression grew thoughtful. "I have the same summons, along with something else." He showed her his screen. Below the official summons was a second message, this one marked with Earth Defense Force encryption codes. "Proceed to Phase 2 evaluation. Full disclosure authorized if necessary. Remember, they need us more than we need them." "Marcus," Kethra said slowly, "what exactly is Phase 2? "I think we're about to find out." The next morning, they arrived at Conference Room Alpha to find it occupied by a very different group than they had expected. Instead of Commander Thexvar and the usual instructors, the room contained 3 individuals that Kethra recognized from galactic news broadcasts. Admiral Zuthak of the Coranthian Fleet sat at the head of the table, her crystalline body emanating the deep blue light that indicated serious contemplation. To her left was General Varlesh of the Thraken Defense Corps, his massive frame making the conference chair look like a child's toy. On the right sat someone Kethra didn't recognize, a small, elderly human woman in civilian clothes. "Candidates Chen and Kethra," Admiral Zuthak said formally, "please be seated." They took the indicated chairs, and Kethra felt her earlier suspicions solidifying into certainty. This was definitely not a standard academy evaluation. You have both performed exceptionally well in your training exercises, General Varlesh said, his deep voice rumbling through the room. But more importantly, you have demonstrated the exact combination of skills we have been seeking. The elderly human woman leaned forward slightly. My name is Director Sarah Chen, Earth Intelligence Division. And yes, Marcus, I am related to you, your great-aunt to be precise. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Kethra saw his hands tighten slightly on his chair arms. Director, I wasn't expecting family at a military evaluation. This isn't a military evaluation, Director Chen said calmly. This is a recruitment meeting. We have a problem that requires a very specific skill set, and the two of you have just proven that you possess exactly what we need. Admiral Zuthak activated a holographic display in the center of the table. 3 weeks ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected this. The hologram showed what appeared to be a massive ship, but the design was unlike anything Kethra had ever seen. It was organic-looking, covered in the same kind of metallic scales as the Hydra creature they had fought, and it was clearly moving under its own power. The vessel is approximately 12 kilometers long, General Varlesh explained. It appeared at the edge of the Zarathi system and destroyed 3 patrol ships before disappearing again. Analysis of the wreckage suggests bioweapon technology far beyond anything in our current databases. The Zarathi Empire officially fell 50 years ago, Director Chen added. But it appears that someone has been continuing their bioweapon research in secret, and now they're field testing the results. Kethra felt a chill run down her spine. You think there are more creatures like the one we fought? We think that creature was a reconnaissance probe, Admiral Zuthak said. A small sample designed to gather data on current galactic defense capabilities. The fact that it appeared in our training exercise was not coincidence. Someone is specifically evaluating our military training methods. Marcus had been silent throughout the explanation, but now he spoke up. You want us to hunt them. We want you to do what you did yesterday, General Varlesh said. Work together to track and neutralize threats that conventional military doctrine cannot handle. Humans have a unique approach to predator behavior, and Saurians are the finest natural trackers in the galaxy. Together, you represent a new kind of tactical capability. And if we refuse? Kethra asked. Director Chen smiled, and for a moment, Kethra could see the family resemblance to Marcus. Then you return to your normal training and pretend this conversation never happened. But I think you both know that conventional training won't prepare you for what's coming. The room fell silent as Kethra and Marcus exchanged glances. Yesterday, they had been 2 unlikely partners trying to prove themselves worthy of military academy. Today, they were being offered a chance to become something entirely new. How long do we have to decide? Marcus asked. 24 hours, Admiral Zuthak replied. After that, we move forward with or without you. As they left the conference room, Kethra realized that everything she thought she knew about this training exercise had been wrong from the beginning. The question now was whether she was ready to step into a larger galaxy than she had ever imagined. Kethra spent the night staring at the ceiling of her quarters, her mind racing with implications she was still trying to understand. Everything about the past few days suddenly made sense in a completely different context. Marcus's mysterious confidence, the convenient appearance of a supposedly extinct predator, even her own selection for the program despite her young age. They hadn't been competing for admission to a military academy. They had been auditioning for something much more dangerous and important. At dawn, she found Marcus in the facility's observation deck, looking out at the stars through a massive, transparent wall. He seemed calm, but she was beginning to recognize the signs of intense thought beneath his peaceful exterior. Have you decided? She asked, settling beside him on the bench. I decided 30 years ago, when humanity first made contact with the galactic community, he said quietly. The question is whether you're ready to commit to something that will change your life forever. Tell me what you really know, no more secrets. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching a transport shuttle move across the starfield. Earth has been preparing for this moment since we first learned about bioweapons and the Zarathi Wars. We knew that eventually, someone would revive that technology and use it against the galactic community. We also knew that conventional military responses would be inadequate. So you've been training specifically for this. Every human in the Earth Defense Force has been trained in xenobiology, predator behavior, and unconventional warfare tactics. We've been studying every extinct bioweapon program we could find records of, developing countermeasures for threats that most species have forgotten existed. Kethra felt pieces clicking into place. That's why Director Chen said they need you more than you need them. You're not here to learn from the galaxy's military. You're here to teach them how to fight a war they're not prepared for. Exactly, and we need partners who understand hunting and tracking in ways that humans never could. Saurians have instincts that took humans millennia to develop artificially. Together, we represent something new. A new kind of soldier. A new kind of protector. Marcus turned to face her directly. Kethra, if we accept this assignment, will be facing creatures designed to kill entire star systems. We'll be hunting enemies that most people can't even imagine. And we'll be doing it with minimal support because conventional forces can't operate effectively against bioweapon technology. The weight of what he was describing settled over her like a physical presence. Why me? Why specifically a young Saurian hunter with no military experience? Because you're not trained to think in conventional military terms. Your instincts are pure hunter instincts, uncorrupted by tactical doctrine that doesn't apply to this kind of threat. Marcus smiled slightly. Plus, you're the only candidate who was brave enough to partner with the strange human everyone else was avoiding. Kethra found herself laughing despite the seriousness of the situation. You planned that, didn't you? The whole social isolation thing. I needed a partner who would judge me by my actions rather than my species' reputation. Someone who understood what it felt like to be underestimated. Marcus stood and walked to the transparent wall, placing his hand against the cool surface. The truth is, humans are terrified of what's coming. We've run simulations, studied the historical data, analyzed the tactical implications. Conventional galactic military doctrine will fail against revived Zarathi bioweapon technology. But you think we can succeed? I think we can learn to succeed. It will take time, training, and probably more close calls than either of us wants to think about. Marcus turned back to her. The question is whether you're willing to trust me enough to try. Kethra closed her eyes and extended her senses the way her grandmother had taught her. In the quiet of the observation deck, she could hear the subtle sounds of the station around them. Life support systems, distant conversations, the hum of technology. But beneath it all, she sensed something else. A change in the pattern of things, like the moment before a predator strikes or prey decides to run. The galaxy was about to become a much more dangerous place, and conventional wisdom would not be enough to survive what was coming. I'm in, she said, opening her eyes, but I have conditions. Name them. First, no more lies or half-truths. If we're partners, I need to know everything you know. Second, I want to send a message to my grandmother. If I'm going to be hunting the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, I need her final lessons. Marcus nodded solemnly. Agreed, anything else? Third, when this is over, I want humanity to formally sponsor Sorrow's Prime for full membership in the Galactic Council. My people have been marginalized for too long because we're young and small. But if we're good enough to hunt nightmare creatures for the galaxy's protection, we're good enough for equal representation. That's actually brilliant, and probably easier to accomplish than you think. Earth has been looking for allies who understand that survival sometimes requires unconventional thinking. They made their way back to Conference Room Alpha, where the three senior officers were waiting with expressions that suggested they already knew the answer. We accept, Marcus said formally, but candidate Kethra has conditions that Earth fully supports. Director Chen raised an eyebrow. Let's hear them. After Kethra outlined her requirements, Admiral Zuthak and General Varlesh exchanged glances. The Corinthian's crystalline body flickered with patterns that indicated deep thought. The Council membership request will require formal procedures, Admiral Zuthak said finally. But given the service you're about to provide, I believe support can be arranged. Your other conditions are acceptable. Excellent, Director Chen said, activating a secure data pad. Your first assignment will be familiar territory. 3 days ago, our monitoring stations detected another bioship emergence, this time in the Outer Rim territories. A mining colony has gone silent, and preliminary scans suggest massive biological contamination. The holographic display showed a small planet orbited by industrial platforms. The readings indicated a healthy, functioning colony 24 hours ago, followed by complete communications blackout. Standard protocol would be to send a fleet and overwhelm whatever's down there with superior firepower, General Varlesh explained. But if this is Zarathi bioweapon technology, that approach will result in the contamination spreading to other systems. You need someone to go in quietly, assess the situation, and neutralize the threat without triggering a larger outbreak, Kethra said, understanding immediately. Precisely, a two-person reconnaissance team that can think like predators and move like hunters. Director Chen stood. Your transport leaves in 6 hours. Equipment, tactical briefings, and communication protocols will be provided during transit. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Admiral Zuthak spoke one final time. Candidates Chen and Kethra, you should understand that you are about to become the first members of an entirely new military unit. If you succeed, you will be training others in techniques that don't currently exist. If you fail. We won't fail, Marcus said quietly, and something in his voice made even the massive Thraken general take notice. 2 hours later, they stood in the hangar bay beside a sleek, black vessel that bore no identifying markings. The ship was clearly designed for stealth and speed rather than firepower, equipped with sensor arrays that looked more like hunting equipment than military hardware. Ready for your first real hunt? Marcus asked as they approached the boarding ramp. Kethra checked her gear one final time, feeling the familiar weight of tracking equipment alongside technology she was still learning to use. I've been ready for this my entire life. I just didn't know it yet. As their ship lifted away from the training station and jumped to hyperspace, both of them understood that they were leaving behind everything they had known about their place in the galaxy. Whatever they found on the contaminated mining world would determine not just their own futures, but the fate of entire civilizations. In the cargo hold, carefully secured and monitored, sat specialized equipment that represented humanity's deepest knowledge of bioweapon countermeasures. Techniques developed in secret, tested in simulation, and never before used in real combat. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity's talent for unconventional warfare met the finest natural hunting instincts evolution had ever produced. And somewhere in the dark between stars, ancient nightmares were stirring, unaware that the prey they had been designed to hunt had learned to bite back.